People sitting at the back, can I request them to come in the front so that if someone is coming in late, then they might, it will be easy for them. Thank you. And people who are standing there, please come and sit. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Embassy of Switzerland, Swissnex, the India, and Indian Institute of Human Settlements, IIHS, it's my privilege to welcome all of you to this town hall on sustainable urbanization. We would start now in a couple of minutes through this process, and then may I request, if you have your phones, can you put them on silent mode so it's easier for us to the event. My name is Shirish, and I'll be moderating the entire town hall today. To begin, I would request Ambassador Baum, Marie-Laure, and Amir to please come over here, please. That's my chair. Okay, so today's town hall, this is in the series of 3 events that we have been organizing. So this is like the culmination of the 3 town halls that we've done. So we started with mountains, we started with the water, and then we had now today on cities and urbanization. This is part of the 70 years of Indo-Swiss friendship. That's the logo that you see in the middle. And it's being organized with all the Swiss organizations and partners over here. But to tell you more about this Development Cooperation Town Hall series that we're doing today, I would invite my colleague, Marie-Laure, to say a few words and introduce the whole objective and agenda. You can do it from there, I think it's easier.
It works. Good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to be here. I think I come here, it's better. Very happy to be in Bangalore for this town hall meeting. As Shirish was mentioning, this is the last one, at least for this year, of this thematic town hall meeting. When we thought about it a few months ago, we discussed internally and we say we should do something outside Delhi. That was one of our first criteria. We should do it within in an institution or in a place that means something for SDC, with some a bit of historical ground for that. That's why we went to especially to IRMA in Anand, Gujarat. This is an institute that SDC supported many years ago and co-financed it at that time. And we have to do it in topics, of course, of our interest, but of course of India interest as well. And topic where we think that we can bring an interesting exchange between what is happening in Switzerland and in India around sustainability. So it was all about mountain, sustainable mountain development, sustainable water development, and today is about sustainable cities. We're very happy to be in Bangalore for different reasons. First, because we do it also together with our Consulate General and Swissnex office here. We've been discussing now for more than 1 year that we need to work more in synergies. The good news is that we have a lot in common, and in particular we have 2 topics or 2 themes really in common and in our priority. It's energy and cities. So this is a very good opportunity to bring together tonight people related to Swissnex, but also some people related to SDC work. Being here at IIHS is also a very good opportunity to do something additional with the Institute. We've been partnering with you in our capacities project. You will hear more about this project in a while. And at the same time, it was an opportunity to meet some of our older partners, like CEDT or NTTF, that we don't know personally because it's from previous and predecessors of mine. But we've heard that SDC was very strong and present in the south of India in the past, and there are still institutions here having this link with the Swiss cooperation. So the topic of today about sustainable urbanization, this is a recent focus for us. We've been working in different topics, and actually now we have a kind of cluster that we could name built environment. And in this cluster, we are looking at energy efficiency in building. We're also looking at low carbon cement and air pollution. And within this package, we have this project capacities working in 4 cities in India, but really with the lens of climate change. How are the cities affected by climate change? But at the same time, how the cities which are growing and very fast growing, how can they look for another development and basically a low carbon development. Within the 4 cities, partner cities, this is Coimbatore, Rajkot, Udaipur and Siliguri. We've been then addressing very specific sectors like mobility, waste and water management. We've been supporting them in starting from a good baseline study, looking at emission inventory, vulnerability and risk, and then going into very concrete action through climate action plan. So at that time that we started the design of this project, it was 2.5 or maybe 3 years ago, we had a bit an idea of looking of what in Switzerland or in Europe could be of interest of India in these challenges within the cities. And there is an interesting initiative called the City of Energy, a kind of a label that started in Switzerland and was then kind of also replicated in other European countries, that has an idea of looking at different sectors in the city planning and finding the way basically to reduce the energy through the different sectors. So I won't say more about that because our expert from Switzerland, she will mention it in the panel. So we're looking very much forward of this panel discussion and of course of the time and the high tea we will have afterwards to continue the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marie-Laure. Thank you for this introduction about the whole concept behind this town hall and why we are here. A few months back, when we identified the different topics, we said urbanization is something which is the new area for SDC to work. And I spoke to Amir and said, we want to do this in Chennai, would RO be available? And he said, why do you want to do in Chennai, do it in Bangalore? And I kept insisting we'll do it in Chennai, and he kept insisting in Bangalore. Finally, I said, okay, let's do it Bangalore, but you will have to host it. And I'm glad that he did agree. So, Amir, first reaction from you and in terms of welcome from your side.
So yes, Shirish is right. So I won the battle. So good evening. On behalf of Indian Institute for Human Settlements, I welcome His Excellency Ambassador of Switzerland to India and Bhutan, Ambassador Andres Baum, Marie-Laure, Head Swiss Cooperation Office in India, in Delhi, Sebastian, who is the CEO and Consul General Swiss Next India, Shirish, a dear friend but also a collaborator, who is the Deputy Head Swiss Cooperation Office in India, Charlotte and Neha, who will be speaking, and all of you present today. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to host you. I'm sure this is an important topic. It kind of connects with each and every one who's living in cities, and I'm sure this will be an opportunity to discuss, debate, deliberate, and think about what does sustainable urbanization mean? I am also thankful to the Embassy of Switzerland and the Swiss Cooperation Office in India for giving us this privilege of hosting this important town hall. Just to put the topic in a particular context, a context that is now becoming widely and horrifically a reality, global development, climate and disaster-related policy frameworks have recognized that rapid dynamic urbanization is a dominant challenge which is particularly important in the global south. At the same time, the emerging urbanization is recognized to be an important and a very pertinent opportunity to change the way things have happened in the past. It is in this context that this town hall has been kind of imagined. We'll hear two speakers picking up two distinct elements, but they are connected in many ways. And I'm hopeful that the conversation that will pick up from these initial thoughts will touch upon some other elements that are not explicitly covered, but covered through the discussion that we'll have, and kind of prompt a discussion that we can take forward in months and years to come. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the Swiss government for their long-standing commitment to development cooperation between Switzerland and India, and the numerous initiatives that have been programmed and delivered through this cooperation. I am lucky to be a part of one such initiative, the Capacities Project, which Marie-Laure highlighted. But as an Indian, I am very happy to witness some path-breaking action happening in India through the Capacities Initiative and other programs and initiatives that the Swiss government has delivered, programmed, and also are in the pipeline. I thank all of you who have taken time to come here this evening and be a part of this important conversation on sustainable urbanization, and I look forward to an engaging evening. Thank you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you very much. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is the part of the 70 years of celebration, and Ambassador Baum is here with us. He has never said no to most of the events that we have requested him to come. So I would now request Ambassador Baum to kindly address us and tell us more about the partnerships and the friendship work that we're basically doing.
The microphone. Huh?
Yeah.
Distinguished hosts, esteemed guests, dear friends. It is a great pleasure for me to be here in Bangalore today to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Treaty of Friendship between Switzerland and India. This was one of the first such treaties inked by independent India. And since the very beginning, the Swiss diplomatic network in India has brought together people from both countries who are innovators in their fields, be it in business, research, technology, politics, culture, or development cooperation. To commemorate 70 years of Indo-Swiss friendship, events and activities are taking place in cities across India, as well as in Switzerland. Swiss President Doris Leuthard officially launched the series of events during her state visit to India in August 2017. Since then, more than 30 events have taken place in over 40 Indian and Swiss cities, reaching out to an audience of almost 20,000 people. Very recently, Swiss Foreign Minister Dr. Ignazio Cassis attended the 70th anniversary celebration in New Delhi on 10th August 2018. The 70 years of Swiss-Indian Friendship Initiative has been designed and organized by the Embassy of Switzerland and the whole official Swiss network in India. I would also like to acknowledge the generous support of both Swiss and Indian companies for this initiative. The scope and reach of the series of events have only been possible through their commitment and contribution. Development cooperation between Switzerland and India has been one of the hallmarks of these 70 years. Spearheaded by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, SDC, Switzerland has worked as a long-standing partner of India in addressing its priorities towards bringing socio-economic development through sustainable management of natural resources and the environment. From our first step of bilateral cooperation in Kerala in the south of India to our current engagement in Jammu and Kashmir in the north, from Arunachal Pradesh in the northeast to Gujarat in the west, SDC has worked across the length and breadth of the country. Development cooperation has contributed to improving livelihoods through the means of securing basic needs of food, water and shelter, and generating jobs and incomes through training and skill development. It has contributed to enhancing services through access to financial services, build capacity for education and institutions, and strengthen participative processes of civil society and grassroots organizations. Development cooperation has also focused on enabling sustainability through the protection of the natural environment and resources. Since 2018, the focus of our development cooperation has changed towards addressing the global public goods of climate and the environment in India. Our aim is to contribute to climate-compatible development over the long term. SDC strives to enhance the resilience of people, institutions, and ecosystems in responding to the impacts of climate variability and climate change. It is also committed to supporting India's effort to achieve energy security and a lower emission development pathway by promoting renewable energy and energy efficiency in key sectors. One specific initiative aims at building capacities towards carbon and climate resilient city development. We just talked about it already. It's called Capacities. This project supports 4 cities, Coimbatore, Rajkot, Udaipur, Siliguri, through a series of measures in terms of planning and implementation in order to make them climate resilient. While our 70 Years of Friendship initiative is very much future-oriented, this is also a good time to look back by recalling some milestones of our past cooperation. And I'll focus specifically on those shaped in this city of Bangalore. Education and training have always been a key element of our development cooperation. Building on Swiss competencies in vocational training, Switzerland, in partnership with the Indian Institute of Science, set up the Center for Electronics, Design and Technology in 1974. It intended to provide training in electronics at the research industry interface. The CDT has now become a full-fledged department offering academic and research programs. Its success has resulted in the replication by the government of similar centers across India. More recently, in our collaboration with the Department of Science and Technology on the Indian Himalayas, the Indian Institute of Science was involved in developing a curriculum for the training of young Indian researchers in the field of glaciology. The curriculum and the training program structure are now being scaled up across the Hindu Kush Himalayan countries. Another significant collaboration with the IIHS has resulted in the elaboration of a common framework for climate vulnerability and risk assessment for the entire Indian Himalayan region. As part of the Capacities project I mentioned earlier, we have a partnership with our host, the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. It aims at understanding the different drivers of migration and how these can influence planning in cities. I would also like to congratulate the IIHS and its researchers for their contribution to drafting the IPCC's special report on climate change impacts entitled Global Warming of 1.5 degrees. Its message is unequivocal. It is urgent for all of us to act. Most significantly, since 2010, Switzerland is present in Bangalore with a Consulate General and the SwissNex office dedicated to fostering relations in education, research and innovation between our two countries. Over the past years, SwissNex India has established many links between researchers, entrepreneurs, innovators, and policymakers. My colleague, Consul General Sébastien Hug, will tell you about their activities a bit later. Let me end by saying that for us, India is much more than just one other partner country. Our cooperation with India has always had an energizing and inspiring effect on Swiss development cooperation as a whole and across the world. India is therefore naturally also the country with several firsts to its credit. Our first comprehensive bilateral development assistance started with India in 1963. The first SDC coordination office was set up in Delhi in 1968, and so on. I'm confident that as our collaboration becomes even more strategic and thematic, we will have several new sets of firsts with India, which will inspire our international cooperation in the future. It is a privilege to be with all of you here today to celebrate the spirit of Indo-Swiss friendship, according to our slogan, Connecting Minds to Inspire the Future, and to reflect together on the important topic of urbanization, which is a global phenomenon and will shape future generations and economies. I look forward to hearing the views of our experts on how to integrate sustainability into urban planning in order to make our cities climate resilient. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. As always, you kind of completed the entire story of our cooperation and our history here. And I think, once again, very grateful for your presence to be part of this series of events that we are doing. I would now request you, Marie-Laure and Ahmed, to please take the first seat again. Now, as Amir said in his opening remarks, I mean, India is urbanizing, and I think that's something we have to very quickly accept the fact that we are soon going to be a large urban settlements across the country. And the pace at which we are urbanizing, it's very fast and at times very unsustainable, the way our cities are really growing. They're becoming the engines of economic growth, livelihood opportunities are here, and therefore there is a strong pressure and push for more and more people to come and live in the cities. What it means is an increased demand for energy, increased demand for water, increase in demand for managing different elements of pollution, whether it's waste, whether it's wastewater, etc. And the entire air pollution debate, which we are lucky to be in Bangalore and escape the problem of Delhi that we have right now. But I think it kind of raises a larger issue in front of all of us. That's the objective of this conversation this afternoon. Can we look into elements which can define the sustainability as we urbanize in India? Can we learn from the experience of other countries, including, for example, from Switzerland, how it has essentially urbanized and how it has basically grown as a country? So in order to address this further, we have two experts, as you've seen their names earlier in this one and it's also been mentioned. The idea behind their presentation is to address the issue of how Switzerland and India are basically looking at urbanization. What are the certain elements of commonality between the two processes? Is there something that we can learn from each other in terms of how we can essentially improve? So more looking at an integrated approach towards urban planning, how can essentially that be addressed as part of the process? So our first speaker is Ms. Charlotte Spörndli. Charlotte will be, works for Brandis Energie. It's a consulting firm, specializes, her own specialization is more on the energy policy and planning work. So Charlotte, if I request you to please come join us here. She will talk about urbanization in Switzerland, and she'll also talk about how integrated and multi-level planning is a process which is so much integrated into the city planning in Switzerland. Our second speaker is Dr. Neha Sami from the Indian Institute of Human Settlements. She of course specializes also, I'm struggling with a few things, in the field of governance and sustainability for the urban planning. And today she'll talk about local action on climate change. So Neha, please join us here. Okay. So to take the conversation or start the conversation, I would first invite Charlotte to come and tell us the Swiss story and how integrated urban planning is essentially part of it. I need to find a way to get your presentation. You might have this is convenient.
Hello.
So can you hear me? Is that okay? So thanks a lot, Shirish, for the introduction. Thanks to SDC for the invitation to come here. I'm very pleased to be here. On one hand, to bring you some examples of Swiss cities, of some experiences that we have made there, and hopefully this will support you also in your work, in your dialogue here. But on the other hand, I'm also very keen to learn Okay, is it better now? Yeah. So first some introductory words to the context of Switzerland, of Swiss cities, and then I will really go into our subject today and show you some very concrete experience in different fields of actions of Swiss sustainable and resilient cities. So I tried to fit Switzerland just to see the size a bit into Karnataka. It's not 100% exact, the scale, but you can see it's about, I think it would fit about 5 times just into Karnataka, and we're 8 million people about. So already here you can see it's really different dimensions. So if I say big, if I say many people in the context of Switzerland, you have to translate it to India, and you might think, okay, we're pretty small. Also, maybe this applies the same if we are talking about density of population. Here you can see the green, all the greens part, they are really sparsely populated, many sheep, but not many people. And then, but I'm going to talk mainly about actually the city of Zurich. This is with a huge agglomeration, again huge, an agglomeration around it, and there you can see we have densities of population around 2,000 inhabitants per square kilometer. So again, a little bit different in the dimensions than here. Also, just one picture of the city of Zurich that you can have it in mind a little bit how it looks like. It's from Swiss or Zurich tourism, so it looks very nice. It's not, doesn't always look that nice, but here again you can see it's quite it's quite compact, of course, the city. Here we have some more agglomeration, which would be kind of in our back when we are standing here, and you can see that here already the mountains, the Alps start. Going into our topic, here you can see the development of the population in Swiss cities. In blue, this is the city of Zurich, the biggest city in Switzerland, and I think you're very familiar with this rather steep rise in population. Just the time frame is different. This is between 1900 and 1960, and if Shirish, you said it was it's maybe an unsustainable growth of cities here in India. This was also fairly true, I think, for the Swiss cities. And this was one of the reasons why we have here a peak of population in the 1960s. All of a sudden, the Swiss cities, of course, jobs were there, people moved to the cities, but then all of a sudden, they were just too dirty. Air was polluted, extremely a lot of traffic, and people actually preferred to move out to the suburbs, and they preferred to commute sometime than living in these cities. And what will be interesting, and where we will have a look at what happened here, actually, at this point, where people started moving back to the cities. This is about starting from 2000, where people moved back because actually quality of life again increased in the cities a lot, and that's when people moved back in. So how did Swiss cities achieve it? Or here we can just a confirmation in data how the fine particulate matter pollution, the air pollution in Zurich of fine dust was in 1990s. And now in 2012. We are still not pleased with the values we have nowadays, but it's a completely different picture than what we have had in the 1990s. This, in part, is of course caused by individual motorized individual transport. Here you can see cars per inhabitant, and the same peak as we had before in this population, in the population rise. Around, no, it later on, as soon as it started, the cars per inhabitant started decreasing. That's about when people moved back into the cities. Because, of course, this is a lot to relate to air pollution, but it's also related to noise. It's really related to quality of life. And this is just an exemplary photograph. This is not the city of Zurich, this is the city of Basel, where I live. In summer times, just everyone goes bathing in the river of Rhine, which flows through the city. So, a preferred pastime in summertime in Switzerland. So, let's go into the fields of action of the Swiss cities, what they can do. I have mentioned here 6 areas. They're drawn from this concept of the Energie city, that was from this label that was mentioned before by Marie-Laure. It's called European Energy Award on a European level. And these 6 areas have been identified as fields of action of European cities where they can really get active to become resilient and sustainable. So I will mainly go into details for integrated planning, waste management, and mobility. I'll start with integrated multi-level urban planning, because this, of course, is often the basis of other activities. I call it integrated multi-level because it's actually integrated on the 2 axes, on a horizontal level and on a vertical level. So we have on a national, or then also sometimes the regional, it's called cantonal level, we have strategic structure plans. So basically saying or giving the big lines of how the land use should be. These plans are binding afterwards to the local authorities, to the local level, which do refine these plans on their level. But this is only one. This is the vertical level, but then we have the horizontal integration. So land use planning is the basis. But then there come a lot of different sectoral plans add to it, and they are all integrated into each other. They really go together so that in the end this is a sustainable planning process. I think here's just some examples of of plans in the field of climate and environment. Of course, there are a lot of different other plans that are being made on local or on national level. What's I think important on these plans, as I said, they are binding to the municipalities. For most of them, they have to do it by law, or they are strongly encouraged with subsidies, etc., by the higher level, government level, to do it. Then they are mostly public, so they can do a reporting on it. Public can request on it why some plans aren't being implemented. They are now GIS based. So I do quite often some energy planning. I can have access to all the other sectoral plans. I can see where are the energy resources, where do we have wind, what's the water, the precipitation. So I have access to all these data in order to establish a specific sectoral plan. I think this is part of having successful plans. And then, of course, there have a midterm and long-term horizon, and going with an action plan too it's not only the spatial planning, it goes with an action plan to it. One example from the field of resilience, rather adaptation to climate change also, we have a long history of establishing hazard or risk maps, vulnerability maps, at a cantonal, at a state level actually, because for a long time the cities or the settlements have been vulnerable to floods in the mountainous areas, to landslides, etc. So this is an instrument we have had for a long time. And the state level, they do it, but then actually it's the local level who has to implement it. They have to implement it in their land use planning, in their buildings obligations, in their for some measurements, concrete measurements with the rivers, etc. And now, as a new topic, which has been caused actually by climate change, we are experiencing now also heat waves. We didn't have this before, they come much often. So this was a first pilot actually in Zurich, sort of pilot, where they identified heat islands in the densely populated areas. So this went into this integrated planning again, and now if you, for example, want to have a construction site in the red area, which is at risk of heating up too much, you'll have different regulations that you'll have to follow if you're situated in one of these heat islands. As last example from this planning sector, I'd like to show you what I call a smart example. I've understood we are here in the Indian Silicon Valley, so I want to show some example also with new IT technology. This is an example from a rather small village. It's called Buyi. This is in green here, and what they did together with the biggest telecommunication provider, they analyzed, anonymized and aggregated mobile phone traces. So all the commuters going to this the village of Buyi in the morning or in the evening back, they traced them, and they now know where most of the commuters come from, or where and at what time, and where they go to in the evening. And of course, such type of data is extremely useful if you have to do mobility planning. So all of a sudden you know that here's another city up here, this red dot. So you know that you might have might want a direct train between this city and your village in order to bring people there where they want to go. This also brings us to the topic of mobility, of course, very important in urbanization. An example, again, from the city of Zurich, how they managed to shift the modal share, which is the distribution of which type of transport people use within the city. So in 2000, the biggest share was in motorized individual transport in grey. Then about the same for on foot and public transport, only a small part on bikes. They managed in these 15 years to really cut down this share of motorized individual transport. It doesn't look that big, this shift, but actually, if you know, also in Switzerland, people love cars. Basically, all of them could afford cars. So it's really a difficult task to achieve, to bring people away from their cars and bring them on the buses, trams, and trains, etc. So they had set up a whole program, and the main principle they shifted is that they say, okay, we don't want to. They shifted away actually from a demand-oriented motorized individual transport. They said, okay, if there are more cars, we don't want to build them more streets, because then we'll have more cars again. So they actually shifted to a supply-oriented principle for motorized individual transport. So they said, okay, that's the roads we have, we don't going to build more. But on the other hand, in the public transport, there we're going to be really demand-oriented, because if people want to use it, we have to provide enough capacity in public transport. I just listed some measures, very concrete measures. They've frozen the number of public parking spaces. They have dedicated tracks and separate bus lines. Green on request for public transport at every intersection with traffic lights. Just all these different measures you can have. There's an S-Bahn. This is sort of a metro system above ground and underground, with really an interval table every 15 minutes. Also a good coordination with other public transporting system of the neighboring regions, so that people don't have to buy tickets every time. And yeah, things like this. One other important principle, I think, is if you want to have people use public transport, you have to consider that they are at the same time pedestrians, because they will have to go to the public transport and from there again, and you have to make sure that this also is attractive for them, these tracks. Last example, do I have some time left? Shirish? From waste collection, again, a smart example, as I call it. We have quite a long history in Switzerland, but also in Europe, of segregating waste fractions. So this is not that much the topic right now. These people are very used to this. What they are now worried about is, one thing is the logistics of collecting these different waste fractions, and of how to use best the energy you can still get out of the parts that you cannot recycle. I'll go into more detail. So here you can see these are smart on-the-floor waste containers. So they're equipped with sensors, so as soon as they're getting filled up, they actually give a signal to the collection vehicles that they have to be emptied. So it really helps in not having too much of these circles of the vehicles. What's being done with biowaste? How to get most of resources back from the biowaste and also energy. Again, example of Zurich, they have set up a biogas plant, a methanization plant, where all the biowaste goes into it and where biogas is produced out of it. This is just next to the sewage treatment plant, where as well you get sewage gas out of it. Afterwards you just need another plant to purify this gas a bit before you can inject it into the normal gas supply network. With the rest, kind of the solid and liquid parts that are not gasified, you can sort of compost them again, and this can go into agriculture as an input. So, and the biogas, of course, can be used wherever for transport or in the houses for cooking or heating. And at the same time, of course, we have the waste incineration plants, because landfills are not allowed anymore in Switzerland. Just the rest, which cannot be recycled or reused in other way, is being burned. But then again, here now, the focus is on really using the heat that's been produced in these waste incineration plants, to use it in industry, to use it in winter for heating purposes or whatever, so that nearly nothing kind of gets lost. And just one last comment, really one slide I wanted to add on cooperation and communication, because it was very recent. I don't know about this, if you know about this initiative. I'm sure you know hackathons. What has been coming up as a global initiative, I think it has been the 4th edition or something of climatons. It just happened this weekend, actually, on Friday and Saturday, where cities, they can put out a challenge. For example, Zurich, they said, okay, we are interested in solution. How can virtual reality technology contribute to more climate-friendly mobility, for example? So cities put out these challenges, and interested stakeholders, participants have 24 hours to propose solutions to these challenges. And I think it's just quite a nice idea of how to get in contact with other stakeholders. Yeah, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you for making this interesting presentation around the entire integrated approach for planning, and then with some of these examples for the sectors. I think it's quite interesting, and I think once Neha presents, I think we'll open up for further discussion on the different aspects. So with that, Neha, I will now invite you to please come and respond.
That's right. Thank you. So thank you, Amir and Shirish, for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I'm really delighted to be able to participate. As Shirish mentioned, I'm Neha Sami. I'm one of the faculty here at IIHS. And what I'll be talking to you today is drawing on some work that actually Amir and I have done together on looking at localizing climate governance. My talk today will kind of draw largely from the work that we have done over the last couple of years. But I'd like to kind of just give you an overview of what I'm going to be talking about before I get into the actual content of the presentation itself. So there's the talk's actually in 2 parts again, just building on what Charlotte did, where I'll give an overview or a context for Indian urbanization first, and then move into the actual content of my research itself. So India is undergoing perhaps what is its largest transition. Over the next decade, perhaps sooner, there will be about 850 million people who will live in cities, about a half to a third of them who will be living in poverty. There are a wide range of challenges that come with rapid urbanization, and sustainability and sustainable development is not the least of them. And there are decisions that are being made now in terms of the kinds of infrastructure we use, the kinds of infrastructure that we invest in, natural resource use that we kind of prioritize, especially in terms of fossil fuels or renewable energies, that will determine how our cities grow and whether they are actually able to develop on a more sustainable trajectory or not. There are 2 critical aspects of India's urban transition that I would like to kind of draw your attention to, particularly in the light of what I'm going to talk about. The first is to actually understand what constitutes urban India. So how urban is India really? And the census of India has a very stringent definition, perhaps amongst the most stringent in the world, around how to count urban population. So it has a density criteria, it has a population criteria, and most unusually, when you compare it internationally, it has also an employment criteria. So we need to have more than 400 people per square kilometer, more than 5,000 people living in any particular settlement, and at least 75% of the labor force, male labor force, engaged in non-agricultural activities for the settlement to be counted as urban. So if we take all of those criteria, about 32%, according to the Census of India, 32% of India is urban. If we use population alone, like a lot of countries across the world do, we're 50% urban. And these are figures from the 2011 census, which is the latest that came out. If we use only density, we're actually 70% urban, and by now that has probably crossed that number. And when you look at labor, which seems to be the kind of outlying condition, we're about 35 to 36% urban. Given all of this, where we have a lot of settlements that display urban-like characteristics, even though they may not be counted as urban, it's really surprising that only 26% of our population is administered as urban. And this is particularly challenging because that sort of brings urban governance issues very front and center, because we have a lot of urban settlements or urban-like settlements that do not actually have the structures to be able to deal with challenges that come with this kind of urbanization. The second part is to understand what actually is driving this transition. So the share of migration actually over the last, this is from 1970s to the early 2000s, the share of migration has actually been quite stable. So it is not really migration from rural to urban that is driving this change, but what a lot of people have called in situ urbanization or subaltern urbanization, which is essentially reclassifying settlements. So settlements are becoming urban partly due to natural population increase, and as they grow in population, these are now being reclassified as urban. Now the reclassification is actually a particular concern because, like I said, a large number of these urban-like settlements have been reclassified as cities or as urban settlements without actually having the structures that urban governance, urban areas require. So with that as kind of with that as a broad context, I'd like to kind of move on to the second part, which is focusing particularly on the research that Amir and a lot of our colleagues here have been involved in over the last 4 or 5 years, looking at climate adaptation particularly. So this was based on work that was funded by IDRC in Canada and DFID from the UK. The project was sort of a very large project that worked across 7 countries in semi-arid regions, focusing particularly on understanding climate adaptation and looking especially at sort of governance issues and how we can use innovations in governance to facilitate a shift from ad hoc adaptation to large-scale adaptation. The study sites here were in the states of Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu, and the work that I'll be talking to you about is the work that I did in Bangalore and Chennai, focusing particularly on these 2 states. So the work that I did was looking at specifically at climate action plans that all states in India were required to make, looking at, again, at the two states of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. The data that I used involved a close reading of both the national and state plans, climate policy documents, semi-structured interviews with a large range of stakeholders in Bangalore, in Delhi, and in Chennai. And the kind of overview of the findings that we came up with as part of this research was that environmental governance frameworks, and I'm talking about environmental governance more broadly and not specifically only about climate change, has focused largely on reconciling developmental priorities and economic growth priorities with sustainable development pathways. There is actually no specific institutional architecture that we have to deal with climate change or environmental issues at subnational levels, let alone at the level of the city. And so I'll be focusing largely on questions of scale and how the interaction between state and city governance structures actually takes place, and how actors at these scales are able to act and implement on several of the solutions that have been proposed. Like I said, the lowest scale of climate planning is that of the state. We do not have a city level agency, and that I think stands out quite clearly from what Charlotte was explaining earlier. We do not have city-level agencies for dealing with environmental issues. These climate action plans emerged from a national priority for states to use the national planning process for climate change issues to develop kind of their own climate action plans that did exactly what I was talking about earlier, which is reconciling development pathways along with sustainable development pathways. The challenge here, though, is that at the national level, urban development and climate change are handled by 2 different ministries, and consequently that kind of has passed down to lower subnational levels, where there ends up being little coordination between these ministries at the state or city scales. And more strikingly, for a country that's rapidly urbanizing at this rate, local government officials are conspicuously absent from both the plan making as well as the implementation processes. And since climate action plans in Indian cities are largely at the state level, and there isn't really a separate urban component to these plans, the focus ends up being much broader. So the focus of these plans is very wide-ranging, everything from sort of agriculture and animal husbandry to regional level initiatives on clean energy, as the Karnataka plan lays out. And again, for two of the most urbanized states in the country, it's really surprising that although urbanization and urban issues are mentioned in the plans, sort of scattered all over, there really isn't much specific engagement in either the plan for Karnataka or from Tamil Nadu on engaging with local agencies or with a clear set of actions at the city scale that would enable implementation, or a clear plan for building capacity at the urban scale to deal with these kinds of challenges at the city level. So just very quickly to give you kind of an overview of what the plan themselves were. Karnataka had 3 plans, only one of which was official. It is also one of the only states that that had a climate plan made by a state agency, which was EMPRI, which is a research and sort of training agency here in just on the outskirts of Bangalore. It does include inputs from government agencies, including some city agencies in Bangalore. EMPRI itself, the officials at EMPRI in interviews mentioned that they were challenged. It was very, very challenging for them to make these plans because they actually were hampered by a lack of understanding about climate issues specifically, and especially to do with urban climate issues. And it does include, like I said, a section on urbanization, but the policy recommendations that come out of it are quite broad and sweeping. And there have been no attempts at all over the last 5 or 6 years since these plans were made to actually take any of these recommendations forward, partly due to a lack of capacity within local governments, but also largely due to a lack of funding. And there has been not much kind of an attempt here in Karnataka to engage with non-state, non-governmental stakeholders, such as a wide range of activists, which are sort of very, very vibrant here, or the private sector, or other academic institutions, apart from a couple that were involved in the plan-making process. In contrast, when we look at Tamil Nadu, there was just one agency involved. It was made with the help and cooperation of GIZ. There was a very strong sort of aim to integrate it with the state's larger strategic infrastructure plan. There are also references to urban challenges right through this plan, but again, urban local bodies are strangely absent from both the planning as well as the implementation process. The participation, although GIZ did a very wide stakeholder planning and engagement process, it was limited largely to state government agencies, and although they had a long list of identified stakeholders, not all of them were included in the plan making process. So given sort of the sort of very quick and rapid overview that I've given, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to focus on the kinds of challenges as well as risks and opportunities that emerge from these kinds of plan making processes. Like I said, and this is, you know, while the work that I did here focused largely on Chennai and Bangalore, this is something that we can say about a lot of Indian cities as well. Local stakeholders are conspicuously absent from planning and implementation processes. We're also beginning to see, not just in the question of environmental governance or environmental planning, but for planning more broadly, a shift towards using consultants to do this planning process, and that kind of has limited buy-in from other government agencies, and that's one of the strong reasons why EMPRI, a state government agency, was selected by Karnataka, because it was assumed that, you know, other government agencies would feel more comfortable engaging with a state government agency rather than someone from the private sector. The biggest challenge really, however, is our fragmented governance structure. We have very strong and in some cases very progressive legislative frameworks. We have laws in the books. The 74th Amendment mandates the decentralization of governance to the urban scale, including environmental planning and governance. The responsibility lies with local city governments. However, the implementation is where the sort of challenge emerges, and that's really where we've stumbled multiple times. There's also a question of a sort of a lack of urgency or willingness at the local level to accept responsibility for environmental issues, partly because it's not seen as something that's a local problem. It's seen as something that's either a national or a global level problem, particularly around questions of climate change that need to be dealt with by national or international treaties. And going back to the question of integrated planning that Charlotte raised in her talk, our planning here has been focused largely on land use planning, and remains focused largely on land use planning and stays quite physically deterministic. A lot of the responses to natural disasters or even larger planning questions or environmental questions tends to be mostly reactive. There's very little proactive planning that goes on. And again, like I said, climate change particularly is not seen as an issue that needs to be addressed at a subnational scale. Given also that when we deal with questions of environmental planning, the timescales are so long and sometimes beyond several people's lifetimes, there are also political and electoral considerations that come into play when you have a country and a government that's strapped for resources and needs to kind of decide where limited funding resources will go. They tend to often be in immediate developmental priorities rather than focusing on long-term solutions. There are two specific challenges: the lack of power at the city or the urban scale, and therefore limits in some ways innovation. There is also the lack of capacity to act. I mentioned EMPRI not having enough kind of training or the ability to, or feeling sort of falling short of being able to engage with questions of climate. This is a sort of widespread concern across multiple government agencies. You have people on whom the sort of role of environmental planning has been sort of thrust in some ways without actually providing them with commensurate training or sort of knowledge building with which, and equipping them with the skills that they would need to deal with these kinds of institutions. Our current urban governance and regulatory structures as they exist on the ground are inadequate, although that is more a question of implementation rather than that of there not being those provisions in our legal framework. It's not all doom and gloom, though. There are, and some, I'm sure sort of when we hear more about the Capacities Project, we'll hear a little bit more about that. But there is sort of what is being called the emergence of environmental champions, and this is both a good and a bad thing. It's good because you have clearly sort of empowered individuals within local government, and Surat and Shimla are, and also sort of Rajkot are examples of places where local governments have been able to step up and take action. But they also depend very strongly on sort of charismatic and sort of driven individuals. And should they move away or sort of retire or not be in power anymore, the entire sort of exercise and all the efforts that they've put in sometimes do not continue with sort of subsequent governments. There are also several emerging national government schemes and funding programs that can be leveraged, and that requires a little bit of kind of creative thinking on part of government officials. Things like Amrut, which is one of the largest kind of national funding, urban sort of reform funding schemes, could very easily be leveraged to harness co-benefits in some of this space. There have been sort of multiple international agencies and organizations, SDC is one of them, that have played a very strong role in actually helping to develop more than anything a knowledge base and provide a lot of capacity building, which I think is absolutely critical within local government, not just at the planning level, but across multiple levels and multiple departments. And perhaps the most important thing is, a lot of us talk about localizing the solution and localizing responses, but I think before doing that, one of the most important things that we need to do is start localizing the problem, because unless a problem itself is seen as something that can be addressed and tackled at the local scale or sometimes at the subnational scale, it's very difficult to kind of motivate people to begin responding to these questions and challenges at a scale that they can then begin to comprehend. Thank you.
Thank you very much for an interesting presenting the Indian scenario and the challenges that we have. And we always felt that we are great in planning, but I think we kind of demystified it a little bit in terms of what we lack on the other side. And I think you're right in terms of the institutional structure. We work in the 4 cities that we're doing. It's so difficult to integrate, and Charlotte has seen when we went to the zone scoping exercise for our cities work. It was very difficult to see how climate change essentially is even not considered as part of the planning process. And that's why once there was a talk about city development plans to have a separate section on climate change to be integrated, but it never took off. But now we are hearing the second version of the state action plan will come. and hopefully that should then start addressing these the areas about integration of urban local bodies also in the planning. The reason is that there is a strong belief now that in order to implement the national determined contributions, commitments that is there under the NDC as well as the SDGs commitments, cities become the right unit to actually implement and monitor. But whether the cities have capacities, the municipalities have capacities to deal with that, that's a larger question we should basically be looking at. But I think you highlighted some of the issues. And I think I can agree with the long-term planning point. We were doing work in Coimbatore. We worked with them on a solid waste management strategy. The Swiss expert said 2032, 15-year plan. This was the last year. A 25-year plan, a 15-year plan. And the city officials said, what 15 years? First, we make a plan up to 2019. If it continues, we make a plan up to 2024, and then we think of 2032. So that's the way of planning process essentially. All right. So what we will do at this point is now having both Charlotte and Neha making interesting presentation. First, I will kind of kick off the question answer, and then I open it to the audience for your comments and for your questions as a process. Charlotte, you saw what Neha presented in terms of the challenges that the Indian cities have, and you talked a lot about the multi-level integrated planning as an approach, and what Neha kind of said, this becomes a challenge because different departments, coordination, the municipality, city corporations do not have really the powers essentially to do this thing. Now, given what you've seen, I mean, what would be your first reaction and how this can essentially be addressed moving forward, especially from the university? Giving the example of, I'm sure this must have been challenging in Switzerland too, with the city. So if you could reflect a little bit on that first.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you mentioned quite a lot of challenges. So it's not that easy to have kind of the one solution, but I think one thing I really think would be important to have to, what you say, you have to bring it down to the local level, and they have to see it, maybe not see the environmental challenge as a problem, but see the other added value they could get out of it when they do something. And I think that was part of the solution in Switzerland. I'm quite convinced when, after this decline in population in the cities, they didn't just do it for the sake of the environment, and still today they won't do these things for the sake of the climate, but they'll do it for the sake of offering a better quality of life to their citizens, and by this becoming more attractive as a city and attracting people and businesses. In the end, it's as often a question of also taxes, money to them, why they do things. So this might be one aspect, and then the other thing is, I think the higher level, governmental level, they also have to go ahead as a role model. So if they start integrating in their higher level plans climate change issues, vulnerability issues, it might, because they do planning, the settlement planning, etc. So if the higher state level, they just include other aspects, it might be easier for the local level to include other aspects as well.
Okay. Thank you, Charlotte. Neha, I mean, you saw Charlotte's presentation about the whole multi-level integrated planning. Do you think it's feasible, possible, given that there is a provision for through the 74th Amendment that such a level of this is feasible to be done, but what would really be required in terms of to overcome and implement such approach?
So I think it's absolutely feasible and doable. In fact, some work that we did here with the Bangalore Development Authority, an integrated plan approach was actually written into the call for proposals itself. I think it kind of it needs a little bit of determination and a little bit of willpower to just push it through. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is really the political will to act. And so I think that there's a lot kind of riding on cities. There's a lot riding on investment in cities, and I think that's absolutely right. That that there needs to be ways in which we can leverage kind of wider questions and not just make it about the environment. But I do think that there are. I mean, it's a very sort of complex web of challenges, and I think it's very difficult to kind of start pulling the threads apart there. There's questions of capacity. If you have about 8 planners in the BDA that are responsible for a city of this size and scale, it becomes really challenging for them to start kind of doing things beyond just kind of keeping their head above water, to be perfectly honest. And so it's also, I think, a little bit of thinking of sort of what kinds of support government structures and government officials need, not just from the state itself, but also from us as citizens, and the ways in which we can, I think, instead of kind of seeing governmental officials as constantly being antagonistic, I think it's maybe, one step forward might also be to start saying, is there a way in which if, capacity is falling short within government, are there sort of wider groups that can, participate, especially, given the 74th Amendment having made provisions for citizens' participation, and that has made a change in the way, people have sort of demanded the right to participate across multiple scales and levels. And I think that there might be, one is to, of course, definitely push capacity development to actually bring kind of actual skill sets and training, which is part of what we try to do over here as well, to government officials at multiple scales, not just at the state or not just at the city scale, but across multiple graduated levels. Build specialized capacity to deal with these kinds of issues, and then once there are people who are willing to pick up aspects of integrated planning, on mobility, on environmental issues, on land use planning, on water management, it then becomes possible to have a kind of joint conversation, because right now, partly, I mean, if you look at the governance table for Bangalore, there are about 7 or 8 institutions only dealing with water, and so to start kind of pulling together different strands, it becomes really, really challenging and difficult.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so what we do now is open up the floor for questions and comments. More questions, I hope, and we'll take a bunch of 3, 4, and then we'll go back to the experts, and then again come back. Okay, so if you raise your hands, Amir, I will just, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, if you start, then I'll go to that end, and then I'll keep a mixed match. Okay.
Your Excellency, Ambassador of Switzerland, thank you for your comments. And I'm very happy that India and Switzerland are completing 70 years. Dr. Charlotte and Dr. Neha, as an architect and as a traveler of maybe 100 cities, I find that it's too late now to think about urbanization, but perhaps we should retrofit. Perhaps we should retrofit land use and mobility, and I like the way Switzerland plans everything. It is like a Swiss watch, and as beautiful as the Alps and as clear as glacier water. Integrated approach to analyzing growth and mobility and waste management and energy and building, the materials used, how we build, what is the future for the next 20, 30, 40 years, and reduction of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So what is the possibility of political will? Because COPs always have failed. All the climate change groups of meetings, I mean, nobody's following. Even German cars have given wrong emission analyses. What is the future of retrofitting land use and integrated approaches? How can we change and improve developing countries and continue with integrated approach for the well-developed Europe? So one of the points that are raised in India is, why should we bother about sustainability and renewable energy when the West produces more waste per capita and has been responsible for overuse of carbon emitting energy resources, building, flying, mobility, etc. So how do you answer that for renewable energy? Because obviously renewable thoughts of sustainability will need more investment, and it will take a long time for it to produce quality of life and better resources. In the 70s, many scientists knew that this can happen, will happen if you continue with using electricity and excessive air conditioning and heating, and, too many cars and SUVs and so on. So where is the political will? Where is the integrated approach? And how do we retrofit? Can India be retrofitted? I want your thoughts, both of you.
Thank you. Could you introduce yourself? Sorry, I forgot to ask. If you could introduce yourself first, sorry, your name?
Yeah, my name is Deepthi Divakar, and I have had the opportunity to travel to many countries and observe and study, and I lived in America.
Okay.
And I'm from San Francisco, which is one of the most sustainable energy cities in America.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. There's a question over there, and then I'll
this
come.
is my neighborhood. Welcome to all of you, and thank you IIHS for being in my neighborhood. My family was the first family to come here. This was a fruit orchard of the king of Mysore. So
All right.
welcome.
Thank you very much. Over there. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Ankit here, and I just started a startup in sustainable ventures and experiential learning in that field. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So I basically am looking at different domains and how they approach sustainability in that field or in that domain, starting with architecture as well. So I wanted to understand at a city level, as Dr. Neha pointed out, that there's not a lot of efforts that they're allowed to take, because all the bodies function at a government level, which is a state or central. So how does an entity like C40 come into pictures when they incorporate knowledge transfer between mayors of the different cities of the world? Because in India, if the infrastructure itself is not present, then how do they incorporate and actually make an impact? That was the question.
Okay, thank you. Here, and then I'll come here. Then we'll go back to the experts and then take more questions. Okay.
My name is Siddharth Santosh, and I'm an economics honors undergraduate student. My name is Siddharth, and I'm an economics honors undergraduate student. I've been trying to understand public service delivery and look at that through an urbanization lens, and I work largely with solid waste management as of now. Like you were suggesting towards the end, so BBMP, for example, if you suggest making plans for the next 15 years, it's not going to be possible because they are trying to handle the waste coming out in the next 5 days, forget 1 year. So do you think there is a necessity for a parallel planning of sorts where there's one immediate action plan that is being developed and one long-term plan? Do you think that would work, or a larger systems change is required for better management of public source?
Okay, thank you. So over here.
My name is Jamreddy. I'm a professor at Indian Institute of Science. One was an observation, maybe from Neha. Whenever we talk about this kind of issues in any government setup, they say we are a growing economy, don't suppress me from 7.5% to whatever number. Now, in my opinion, these kind of things, sustainability plus all the climate change, can only be handled if it is integrated with the work plan. Is there any even remote possibility that this is happening in this country? I don't see any sign of it. Number two, we have the famous so-called smart city project. The name has been used, misused, abused. And in my opinion, many people are hiding behind this word called smart city, thinking that we are going to make the country absolutely shining, bright, and suddenly with low PM. And I think we are dreaming about it. And is there any way we can bring sense to say that smart city is a technology? It does what we tell that technology to do. And so this is not the way to go about it. And thirdly, for me, the biggest concern is very often most of us, as you also mentioned, do not see any of these aspects as applying to our own lifetime. And therefore, we think that we can get away exhausting our water, we can get away driving as much as we want. I don't even know whether there is anything like an awareness. Looks like a kind of call them for a lecture. So I don't know how to do it. And I think these are three concerns that I have.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I know there are more hands. Would you like to respond to these first four, and then we go back to the audience so that it's easier?
Maybe a short answer to the first question or first concern. First of all, I really think we shouldn't think it's ever too late I mean, you could have thought in 1960s in Switzerland or 1980s it was too late because people already moved out, etc. And still, I think if you you had talked about water as well. Water was extremely polluted in Switzerland at one stage, and now they're clean again. So I know for climate it's a bit more difficult to turn it around, but I still think we'll have to try it. And the other aspect was, of course, we still have challenges in Western parts of the world as well. We both have our challenge. I mean, I work full-time on the challenges in Western world as well, so it's not, the questions are still there, it's just different questions, but I know we have a huge waste problem still, even though if we deal nicely with them, but we have to bring waste down, we have to bring mobility in general down and not only move to public transport. So the challenges are still there and we'll try to work on it.
Neha?
The scale of the questions, I think, is enormous, and I don't think I'm even going to try and kind of propose solutions to them, especially Professor Reddy's questions. But so to start with your question, Ankit, on how one brings groups like C40 and how they can engage with local level officials. I think part of the ways is to start with not the local level immediately, but for groups like C40 or the 100 Resilient Cities group to actually be open to dealing with multiple levels of government. And so, if you start opening up with conversations around, with say, state governments and then as well as kind of local level agencies in parallel, I think that might help break some of that down, because also local agencies or city agencies often look to state governments for direction. And so I think starting at a slightly different level of government, but not working only at that level of government, I think will, at least as a start, I think just as a very general kind of response, but I'm happy to talk more in detail. So now I would hesitate to push on the sort of parallel planning question, because already in Bangalore we have in this city particularly, we have 4 different agencies that are trying to make master plans at different scales, and so I would hesitate to push for multiple levels and layers of planning. I think it might it might work better if you were to rather push for incremental layers of plans as opposed to, and I mean the solid waste problem is something that the city has been trying to solve for a very long time now, and I think that there's not just one approach in saying the city needs to figure out how to deal with waste, but there also needs to be kind of the reverse, what Charles was talking about, how to kind of actually manage waste at the individual household, neighborhood level, and scale. There are lots of examples of how there has been sort of decentralization of waste management, and so just being innovative and trying to kind of think a little bit out of the box about and not just sort of trying to create a new institution or a new institutional process, I think would be my kind of suggestion. And Professor Reddy, I'm not sure how to begin to deal with the scope of questions that you've asked, but I do definitely think that there is hope for integrated planning, partly because even if we haven't seen much of it in Bangalore, there are other cities in the country that have done it. I mean, Surat is one example, Pune is another example, and I think from at least the little research experience that I have, what I've seen is that the fragmentation of governance structures actually really does make a difference. So in both Surat and Pune, a lot of it's all concentrated in the municipal corporation, and so even though there are separate departments, there aren't actually separate competing agencies. So there isn't the BBMP, the BDA, the BMRDA. We end up having 5 or 6 different institutions that are more or less at the same scale of planning with the same sets of responsibilities. And so I think part of it is to try and address that, try and address the question of fragmented governance. In terms of the smart cities challenge, I think smart cities is everything to everyone, and sort of people are making it and sort of interpreting it in multiple ways, because it's really also, like you said, it's a technology. It's really hard to get your head around something like that in some ways, but I think there are ways in which not just the smart cities mission, but like I mentioned at the end, a whole range of national as well as state level programs and schemes that do have opportunities sort of embedded within them to do exactly, you know, what we were talking about earlier, is to say not just focus on the environment but use other ways of dealing with kind of broader issues to eventually also deal with environmental issues. And I think that perhaps also, you know, given the kind of the scale of challenges that are not just environmental in this country, which are also large into developmental and economic priorities, I think it becomes important to then deal with them in sort of a little bit of a more comprehensive way. And a lot of these programs do offer, particularly at the level of cities, opportunities to sort of pick up and run with a lot of those.
Okay, thank you. There are a few hands here. 1, 2, 3. Sorry? Yours is answered? Okay. But there are 2 behind you, 2, 3 behind you. Okay. Yes, please, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Kapil Jain and I'm just an interested citizen of Bangalore. My question is to you, Dr. Neha. In your presentation you mentioned that a lot of the urbanization that is taking place in India is more reclassification, and that makes a lot of sense to me, and which is why it gets connected to the retrofitting comment that was raised. That becomes very important, and yet not very far from Bangalore, there is a significant greenfield development that is taking place, and that's the state capital of Andhra Pradesh, so Amravati. So, you know, what we read about it is that one of the key features of that development is a very high degree of planning that has been done before the start of the project. And it's now under some state of implementation. Of course, these are early days. My question to you is, are you familiar, and therefore, what are your comments on development of Amravati? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good evening. I am Chetan, a postgraduate student of economics, studying in Bangalore. I have lived all my life in Bangalore. So, based on few of the minor changes that I observe and based on the things I've studied, I have a few questions. I would want to give a context of what I want to ask about planning and implementation. It's pretty straightforward. When the Bangalore Metro, lifeline of many Bangaloreans now, for quite some time, mine too, it was planned in 2003 when the population of Bangalore was around 6 million. And when it was implemented, their first phase of full operations in 2017, the population of Bangalore was twice as much. What I wish to say is, planning, my stand is ambiguous here. Planning might not be the problem. Implementation is certainly a problem, but as the last previous SwissNext program was initiated, I remember the words, we have enough problems, let's talk about what we can do about it. Instead of defining the problem, I would want to know if at all there is any thing to be done than planning and implementation. Is there something, can we shift the discourse to something else, or is there something else other than these two things? Thank you.
Thank you. Over here. Yeah, I'm coming that side. Let me finish this side, then I'll come this side. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Biplab, faculty member from Presidency University. So my question is related with government structure and institutional structure free from government cycles. Okay. So as Dr. Neha was pointing out, that political willingness and government structure is a challenge for the implementation of climate-related issues. Now, we know that government structure has a cycle of 5 years. Now, government will always target for such issues or program which will be having a fruitful result in the time frame itself. Now, these climate issues and environment-related issues are always a long-term plan, right? So, is there any possibility that it could bring under institutional structure where it is free from the government cycles? Is there any possibility for that?
Okay, thank you. Interesting. The 2 here. Yeah.
Hemchandra. I just go back to Dr. Charlotte, her maps which she showed, how she interposed Switzerland into Karnataka. Now, in the 80s, early 80s, I used to travel quite frequently from the east and the west of Switzerland and to the south. And what friends there said is, people in Geneva said, what's there in Zurich that you're going so far? And people in Zurich said, what is there in Geneva that you're going so far away? And people in the Italian border side, they had never been to any of these places, and they didn't know. I mean, what I'm saying is, your population is very small, and you're able to plan. What I want to go back is, you said that at some point, the density of population in the urban areas fell, and then gradually it has risen up. See, in Bangalore, I'm not sure what the numbers, there are maybe several thousand who come into work every day and go back to their own towns and villages nearby. So, but what has happened here is, we are landed in a mess. They're incorporating hundreds of villages every now and then to make it urbanized centers, so that to provide better facilities, better infrastructure. They don't have the infrastructure, but they want to provide infrastructure to villages, and then Dr. Sinha will tell, they land into trouble of acquiring land, all these kind of things. What I want to know from Dr. Charlotte is, you also mentioned that the density of population is now going back into the urban areas. Why is that? Is there any problem in the rural areas? I've seen the efficiency of trains and buses in Switzerland, how people will just time themselves with 2 minutes to go to the station, and then they catch a train going back home, and they could be living in the hills, on the mountains. And they have no problem getting there, and they are assured they can go home in the night. Here you can't do that. If you're a few minutes late, you're lost. You can't go back to your village or a town. So our infrastructure is badly insane. So how do you respond to that kind of your population is very small, you can plan. Here, as you mentioned, maybe our city's population is much more than your whole country.
I'm Nishka Ratnam, and I've been media from the time I could spell my name. My mother was very close in the development process of this country and with the government, and I have seen through the years the change in attitude of an establishment in Delhi towards development. And I have grown up at a time when we could tell the Planning Commission that I think we should have less cars, and the Planning Commission actually thought about it. So I liked what you said, and I really got impressed by what you said when you said that, we realize that having more roads doesn't necessarily help, because you end up having more cars. And that is the kind of thing that we could say at one time to a government, which we can't do now. I'm just curious to know, would the Swiss government, if I can use such a word, dare to think about how to help our mindset? It's not planning, it's not the money, it's not the, the 3-year and the 2-year and the 5-year term, and whether, it is sustainable or whether it is SDG versus HLI, that sort of thing. Would you dare to talk about a mindset which makes us understand that perhaps going to work on a bicycle is not below your status? Would you dare to delve into that category of human being that says, listen, I sell tea but I own an SUV? Would the Swiss government dare to encroach into that mind space?
I don't know. I think that's going to be a challenging question to answer, but Charlotte, floor is all yours. Huh? I'm sure everybody's looking, even the ambassador is looking at you to get the guest answer now. Yeah. No, you can start with the answer, but yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I really look at the ambassador. Do you want to say something or not on the government? No. So I'm not actually sure if in Switzerland they would dare to say it like this to the population either. So it's still today, it's also a difficult thing to, it's still cars are the thing to have, but I also believe still in Switzerland that's what we have to change. And I think, at least in the cities, in the really urban areas, there it's changing. That people living in the cities, it's not a status symbol that much anymore, the car. It's much more what you see now for families living in cities. They have these electronic cargo bikes, so where they sit the children in front of them. So these things, they have to really change. And it is changing first in the cities, and then it might also change in other parts of the countries. Another aspect I wanted to mention, I mean, most of these, we have this very democratic system where we vote, not only vote during elections, but we vote on a lot of really, on really the things, the subject itself. So, for example, in Zurich, I think many of these things were only possible, and the government can defend it that strongly and that strictly right now, because there was a vote on very ambitious climate targets some 10 years back. And if you manage to have at one stage this yes, which is hard to get, but afterwards you can of course do many more things that you couldn't do as government if you wouldn't have this democratic legitimation to do it.
Thank you. To the other question that was there in terms of the planning.
Yeah, I think, also why people are moving back now to the cities. I don't know, actually I would have to look it up if it's really bigger than, because Switzerland itself is quite growing. In Europe it has one of the bigger growth rates, so if this growth in the cities is bigger than on average actually, so it's not that people are moving back from the suburbs to the cities, it's just cities are again growing. One aspect to this is I think that the capacities of the administrations also of smaller villages are quite good, and there as well they are able to handle their own territory on their own. I mean, I'm also an advisor of a really small city, or not even a city, 5,000 inhabitants, just next to Zurich, and they would do nearly as well as Zurich because they just have the capacities to do it. It's a lot of question of capacities that you also in the smaller villages, they can be independent and do their planning on their own.
Okay. Neha? A lot of were again directed towards you. Yeah.
Again, I actually don't know more than what's in the papers about Amravati, so I can't honestly comment. I think that it's actually in some ways more challenging to plan a greenfield development, partly because you have in some ways what they call a clean slate. Although there are, it's not really a clean slate. There are people living there. There are, they may not be urban, but there are still sort of populations there. I think that in sort of connecting that to sort of the question of retrofitting, I think what you're seeing in a lot of cities in India, I mean the redevelopment of mill land, for example, is really in some ways retrofitting. Whether it's the kind of retrofitting we want, or how one engages with those questions is a tricky one, because you also don't have a single sort of monolithic public, right? That even within this room there are multiple people and multiple perspectives, and I think that this question of actually voting on city level developmental priorities is actually a very interesting proposition, and I think that that might help in some ways deal with questions of what one does with tracts of land that open up, like the mill lands in Mumbai or even in Bangalore over here. And so I think that I don't again feel that there isn't hope to retrofit, because you're constantly seeing buildings coming down and new ones being built on the same spot. So that is in some ways kind of reusing existing land within cities, but it's just a question of thinking of how that's being reused and what that purpose is for, and whether it's happening in isolation or whether it's kind of sitting with a larger sort of hopes of how the city expects to grow or develop. Chetan, your question of whether there is anything other than planning or implementation to kind of switch the discourse? It's actually really a difficult question for me to answer because I am a planner. My training is in urban planning, and I deal with questions of planning and implementation on a daily basis in the teaching that I do as well as in the research. And so I really honestly don't know how to answer your question, because for me that really is the lens with which I look at that. But thank you for raising it, because this will now push me to think on sort of different lines, to think about how we can actually switch the discourse away from planning and implementation. And to go to the question of how to free kind of environmental change from electoral and government cycles, I think that again is not easy to do. But I think that if we can sort of break up these problems into smaller, more bite-sized issues that resonate much more with people. So, when you talk about things like floods, when you talk about things like that, the rains or drought, or having to pay more for your electricity bill, for example, and to be able to kind of link that discourse back to larger questions, I think that's sort of the beginning of that conversation, because a lot of us, feel it in very different ways, and even several of us who do research on these issues, when it comes time to kind of use less water, or not drive our cars, or pay a little bit more for electricity, it becomes sort of we hesitate a little bit to move in that direction. So I think part of it is also to reduce large challenges into smaller, more manageable chunks, and manageable kind of bite-sized pieces that we can actually deal with, not just as city governments, but also as individuals. Because eventually, I mean, just to go back to the Swiss example, if there is a sort of strong democratic mandate behind a lot of these challenges and a lot of these sort of policy implementations, that gives the government a very strong mandate to push ahead and sort of move ahead on particular aspects that have kind of emerged.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I just wanted to add a bit to this question of, is there something else than planning and implementing? To me, really, it goes into the direction of the question from the lady. It's also marketing and communication, and we would need more sociologists, because we really need to change the mindset of people. And this is maybe the basis of it all, and afterwards we can start planning. So I would be happy if cities or other levels of authorities, governments would much more invest also into these type of activities.
Okay, thanks. Just on the Amravati, let me just give a quick response. I mean, we were also approached by the city of Amravati in terms of the planning process. It's putting a lot of effort in terms of designing and planning the city. It has gone through a very international tender procedures to identify planners and architects, etc., to design. They approached us, SDC. We have a project on building energy efficiency project. We work with the Bureau of Energy Efficiency to provide technical advisories to builders, developers when they build new buildings, residential building, etc. So they approached our project essentially to help them in terms of making public buildings energy efficient. So that level of planning is being done in terms of they're looking at the mobility, transport planning. The Singapore government is essentially helping them a lot. And they've approached various, this one. In fact, even the canton of Zurich is a partner to the city of Amravati in terms of the planning process, etc. So they're doing with a lot of partners at Seaside, but I think what is happened so far is implementation on ground, and that's where the process has been fairly slow so far. Okay. Last 2 minutes of questions. I know one hand is here. I think I was looking this side, so maybe I've missed. So if anybody else? Otherwise, I think you're the only one to ask, and then we...
Hi, my name is Lena. I'm the coordinator for the Bangalore Sustainability Forum, and I wanted to pick up Nishka's question regarding cycling. So I'm an avid cyclist. I cycle everywhere in Bangalore. I commute 14 kilometers to work every day on the Outer Ring Road and Bellary Road. And so I want to add a few practical aspects, because I advocate cycling a lot. And there are two very practical aspects. One, I need a shower. When I cycle 14 kilometers to office, you don't want to sit next to me if I don't have a shower. But how many offices do provide a shower? Because the weather here is just, you cycle 5 kilometers, you need a shower. And that's different, like it is in Switzerland. And the other thing is, cycling is not so much part of the like office community or so. So many people are just scared. Like I grew up cycling. I grew up in a village. I cycled to school. My family goes on cycling vacations. So I worked as a bike messenger. So for me, being in traffic, it's just natural. But for many people here, it's not. And when they start cycling, there is no cycling path. There is no respect for cycling. There is nothing like to protect them. And there is no infrastructure given to them. And so how do you expect people to start cycling if there is no infrastructure given to it? Yeah, but here's also one thing where corporates can also pitch in by simply providing a shower at office.
I know of at least one office in Delhi which does that. Huh? WRI has made a provision for that. Okay.
You talked about cement. Somebody here talked about cement. And I was feeling very hard with Happy Contractor. So could we go back to tonight, for whitewash? And he said so arrogantly to me, Madam, आपका बुद्धि हो चुकी है and आपके ख्याल तो आपके एज से मैच करेंगे पर अब तो स्मार्ट सिटीज आएंगे and it's going to be only glass. Madam, आप शांति से रहिए. That was the end.
Thank you. Can I just wrap it up so that we can then respond? So I think we can just also have to keep the time in mind. So, okay. I know I've been putting both of you in a lot of bother, so I'm going to do it for one last time. I know you've been cooperating so far. I have one request. Now, if having heard the question answers and also your own presentations, if you have to give one specific recommendations in terms of what needs to be done to move towards making cities more livable, climate resilient cities, so either at the more policy level or the process level, what would be your key recommendations for us to essentially look at as we move forward?
To me, just I would answer with maybe a sector to really tackle, and to me, really, it is mobility and traffic. I would really focus on, but there you do have to. There are loose ends everywhere, and you have to start everywhere. I think you have to start with the planning at the same time. You have to start encouraging people to do it, etc.
Okay. All right. Neha?
I would start with awareness building, because I think that's really something everyone can do. The onus is not just on a particular set of individuals, and I think that's something that's also actually really needed. I mean, to go back to the idea of a mindset change, or to talk about sort of even helping, whether it's at a very kind of generalized scale of understanding the actual horrific nature of what's coming. Or the more technical knowledge that's needed. I think all of it starts from actually building knowledge. It's also a bit selfish because that's what I do. But
okay.
but I really do think that awareness building and actually generating and communicating, I think, that information, not just in sort of academic publications, but also disseminating it much more sort of broadly and widely in a way that a lot of people can pick it up and run with it, I think, is what's really important.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, for answering the question, and also coming up with two very distinct and separate set of response of what we should really to look at. Now, at this stage, I would now like to invite Mr. Sebastian Hook, the CEO of SwissNext India. I didn't even ask him. I said he's going to do concluding remarks. So summing up the entire discussion that has happened over the last 2 hours. So that's what his task is. Sebastian.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening from my side. So it's a real pleasure to be here today at IIHS, and thank you so much for coming here today. So I'm not going to summarize everything. I think there's been too much said. I also have just a small paper like that, so it didn't fit on that. But so as I said, as it was said, I'm heading the SwissNext India team here in Bangalore. We are a science consulate focused on science and innovation, entrepreneurship, startups. I think some of you already know SwissNext. Maybe if you can ask those who know SwissNext, if you could raise your hand. Okay, it's always nice to know that some people know us. So maybe just a few comments. At SwissNext, our mission is to really create connections between universities, entrepreneurs, innovators, also policymakers between India and Switzerland. And we recently actually just have developed our strategy, and one of the focus areas that we want to work on the next couple of years is sustainable cities. So I was very happy when Shirish approached us with this topic. And of course, like, our mission is a slightly different one than SDC, so we really want to bring in research, we want to bring in startups and see where we can create an exchange between Indian startups and Swiss startups, or researchers, academics, policymakers. So maybe 3 comments on what was said today, and maybe more a personal perspective from my side. So actually today is exactly 1 year that I'm here in Bangalore. And previously I lived in Bern, the capital of Switzerland, as you all know. And one of the things that I really liked about Bern, and those who have been there might know, that there's a river called Aare. And one thing that we really like to do when I worked at the Swiss government is, like, during lunchtime, we would change the bathing suits and actually run down to the river and jump into the river and swim down the river. So that, for me, actually also for my family, was not only fun, but it was also a quality of life. And actually when you go nowadays, not now because it's November, but let's say around July, August, you go to Bern, you walk around the river, and you see how many people are there. There are businesses that came up, little shops, a lot of activity, a lot of life, and that would not be possible if that river would be polluted. And in fact, a couple of years ago, it was like that. So this river was really very much polluted, and a lot of work has been done to do that better. And what I want to say, my point is here that having a sustainable city is also about economic opportunities. So in that case, really, it created a lot of new economic opportunities for many people and businesses in Bern to have that area being redeveloped and cleaned. And so that brings me to my second point, which is the importance, and I think was mentioned today, of course, of research and data collection. We had recently at SwissNext an event with EAWAG, which is the research institution in Switzerland, which is in charge of aquatic science. And they have actually played a really important role in Switzerland in cleaning up lakes and rivers. So they created that capacity to do research, understand better the ecosystems, and then eventually take action and implement those recommendations. And so I think it was also mentioned before, very early on, the importance of collecting data and then sharing this data with as many people as possible. So I think that's also something that we see here in Bangalore more and more. And the third point actually is the importance of governance. Another topic that actually came up a few times in some of our events at SwissNext as well. But I'd like to actually end this event on a more positive note, because, like, when you talk about governance, you also think about civil society. And here in Bangalore, I have to say, one thing that really struck me is, like, how active civil society is, how many people you see that are really passionate about these topics, that are doing something, cycling to work. By the way, we have showers at work, so in case you need some showers. People are passionate about this topic, so not just planning, but really implementing on a small scale and really setting an excellent example. And basically, that could be any one of us. So for me, Bangalore is not just a city of entrepreneurs, IT entrepreneurs, but very much also a city of, if I can say so, of citypreneurs. So with that, actually, I'd like to end and thank again also, like, the Embassy and SDC for this excellent collaboration. And I think actually the last word will be given to Marilo.
Is it? No.
Oh, Shirish, okay.
I still manage the event till a few minutes back. All right, okay. Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you very much. I think we're now towards the final end of the program. I would first like to thank and express my gratitude to all the participants. Thank you very much. I know it's the first day of the week. It's difficult timing. But Sebastian, we did it because it was the first day, 1 year of celebration. That's why we chose this particular day. Yeah? Thank you very much for interesting questions. And I think it was a very interesting discussion and engagement that we have. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the IIHS team, not just Amir. I mean, yes, he helped us to get here, but the entire team for the facilities here. Thank you very much for your support. Before we close, I would request Ambassador Marilor to please come, so that we would like to present small mementos to our two speakers. Yes. Yeah. I'll give it to Amir. And Amir, if you could please come, and so Marilor could give you a small. Thank you, Amir, for all the help that you've done. Okay, so with this we come to an end. No, we don't come to an end. All right. Okay. Now this is bad.
But you don't know about it because it's not on the program. So please hear. So today is also Shirish last day of work with SDC. So we've been benefiting now for 8 years and 1 month of his commitment, his vision, his passion about finding solution in energy, mountain, and cities. So we would like to thank you very much for that. A big applause, please. We will miss you very much at the embassy, and I'm sure also from the partners of SDC. And we wish you all the best and all the success for your new assignment. And we have also a small bouquet for you that the ambassador will give you. Photo.
Please join us. Yeah,